Welcome to the Calm Analytics channel. This is Boris Zinghausen with you, and there are a lot of important news stories. So, Steve Witkoff is already in Moscow holding talks with Putin. What should we expect from these negotiations? And will there be an aerial ceasefire as reported by Western media? And what will happen if Trump's special envoy returns empty-handed from the US? Putin is in a serious bind. In the Balkans, the Kremlin is taking another blow to the gut. And what about the captured British MI6 officers? Is that a myth or reality? Military trains carrying Russians are once again starting to arrive in Belarus. All this and more in today's episode. There's going to be a lot of interesting stuff, so if you're new to this channel, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss future episodes. Let's get into it. So, as I'm recording this video, Witkoff is meeting with Putin right now. I watched the footage of their meeting. At least this time, Witkoff didn't do that half bow during the handshake. By the way, this time for some reason it was Putin who bowed, and the Financial Times writes that Trump will absolutely lose it if his representative Witkoff comes back from Moscow empty-handed. Quoting, "It all depends on what Witkoff brings back. If he returns empty-handed with absolutely nothing, Trump will be furious," the source says. Meanwhile, Putin is in an incredibly tough spot, so much so that the rubber box might just snap. Any concession, whether it's the so-called air truce that Western media are writing about or anything else, will be seen as fear of US sanctions, fear of Trump's ultimatum. But the official line says that no one talks to Russia in the language of ultimatums. So, what should be done then? And the deep core patriots are convinced that sanctions don't bother Mother Russia at all. How do you explain that you can no longer strike at those evil Nazi Satanists? Most importantly, why? All in all, Putin is in a very difficult situation, one that of course he brought upon himself with this war. Another important point is the Russian tactic of not agreeing to ultimatums, naturally, but instead putting forward their own terms, in other words, demanding even greater concessions in return. What they might want in exchange, just hypothetically, we'll talk about that a bit later. Meanwhile, Witkoff, by the way, when he arrived in Moscow, he took a walk in the park with Putin's representative, Dmitriev. And this Dmitriev, he's a shrewd and experienced negotiator. It's precisely from him that all sorts of tempting personal offers might come. In general, there is information, according to Bloomberg, that the Kremlin is considering the possibility of proposing a limited air ceasefire, meaning they would stop drone and missile strikes on Ukraine, not including offensive ground operations. So, for example, at the front they could still use them, but not in the rear areas anymore. So, they see this step as a gesture towards Donald Trump in order to avoid possible secondary sanctions, because now even from India there are flights to Russia, and they will be holding talks right after the meeting with Witkoff tomorrow. A meeting between representatives of India and Russia is scheduled for tomorrow. In other words, they're trying to figure out how to avoid falling under sanctions. At the same time, the Kremlin emphasizes that even if there is some sort of, the Kremlin itself does not articulate a ceasefire, I mean an aerial one. I think the first and only time I heard about this was when those two old men, Putin and Lukashenko, Lupa and Pupa, were sitting on the bench, and Lukashenko said, "Well, I told the Americans about the aerial ceasefire, I did tell them." And Putin's goal is to do everything under the table, because you can't say out loud that they're making concessions before the ultimatum expires. You can't tell the deep state folks about this. And of course, even if this ceasefire does happen, it's purely a political gesture, not at all a sign of Putin's desire for peace. No matter how much Peskov or, Lavrov or Zakharova go on about how Putin wants peace, wants it. So let's take out the word peace and replace it with Ukraine's capitulation. That's what Putin wants, Ukraine's capitulation. Give up the regions, give up this, give up that, reduce your army, stop receiving weapons, and there you have it, capitulation. And in 3 years I'll come back when your army is down to 80,000 and then we'll talk. That's what Putin wants. The only reason is fear of sanctions. Here it's important to understand the reason for possible concessions. Peskov recently said, "Why do we need some kind of truce? We're the ones advancing." There's also information that it might be agreed that strikes can be carried out within a certain zone from the front line. Well, in any case, let's wait and see. So right now, Putin just needs to dampen Trump's resolve to impose sanctions. You see, Trump is already saying, I'll impose them every day. I'll impose them right now. I'm determined. The main thing now is to deflect, to talk it out, to blur the issue, to throw out some small concession, just like they did back then. Remember, there was an ultimatum from our European partners, from the US. And when they finally said it directly, that's it. The Russians, we're always for negotiations, we're always for everything good. Let's meet in Turkey. Maybe Putin will come, or maybe he won't. Then somehow everything just got talked over and talked over. That brazen-faced Medinsky showed up, that history teacher, yes, a teacher of his own, made up history, and started saying, now you won't give up 4 regions, later you'll give up 6, and so on. We remember all of this very well. So this is the Russians' tactic, to throw something out, to try to appease with something, and then, if necessary, to make concessions. For now, they've just killed the mood. Then they drag things out a bit more, again using the same scheme. In general, this can't go on forever. There's a sense that Trump really understands that he could get the peace prize for Ukraine. I mean, obviously, no one is going to give him a peace prize for Pakistan and India. That's why he wants it. And he's actually quite resentful about it. Obama got the peace prize undeservedly. This is almost an obsession for Trump. We don't mind. I'll tell you even more. If Donald Trump truly manages to jail that mangy, despicable moth and then explicitly tells him to bring an end to the ongoing war, and on truly decent, equitable terms at that, then we would be more than ready to put up a magnificent, gilded statue of him in every single city across the land. Absolutely no questions asked whatsoever. And now the most important question, what happens if the air truce is broken? I think this is a question that really interests Russians, because even if they agree to it, they'll end up breaking it themselves, blame Ukraine for it, and then that's it. Missiles and drones start flying again. That's something they can do in their usual manner, even if they don't want to. In other words, they would lose one of their key advantages if in some way they were forbidden from striking Ukrainian territory with missiles and drones. So, what options are actually possible? I tend to think that it is still possible that, well, understanding that sanctions could work, even partially, and even then cause serious damage, they might make concessions and declare an aerial ceasefire, but they will set conditions, namely a complete halt to arms supplies to Ukraine. That is most likely, this is exactly what they will do. This will be one of their key conditions. And then look at what will happen next. Yes, the Russians will continue to advance along the front. Well, fine, for a while they won't strike Ukrainian territory. For Ukraine, the supply of weapons will stop and the Russians will just surge forward. They just come at you like madmen, like cockroaches, like some kind of orcish tribe. Why some kind of? That's exactly what they are, an orcish tribe. I mean, Trump mentioned the figure, 112,000 losses on their side since the beginning of this year. Can you imagine that? They're just piling up their ghouls, covering the whole land with them. So it's important, if an air truce is being established, to set a deadline for all this, if Trump is ready to set some deadlines for the offensive. He gave 50 days. So what was the logic? I'm giving 50 days. Putin, advance as far as you can in 50 days. Wherever you end up, that's it. We wrap it up, sign the agreements, and so on. But apparently the strikes on Ukrainian cities, when entire apartment blocks were destroyed, when Melania told Trump, look at what they're doing, these terrorists. And that prompted him to shorten the ultimatum period. And I think there was also an agreement not to strike cities in the rear. Well, what kind of agreements can you have with Putin? Anyway, the important thing is, if Trump is already going along with this, letting Putin advance for a certain period of time. Although I want to say they could have set a one-day deadline and immediately imposed sanctions. But we understand that this is unrealistic right now. So there needs to be a deadline for this offensive as well. All right? An aerial ceasefire. You advance. How much time is left? 40 days. So in 40 days, wherever you are, that's where we finish. That's the kind of logic Trump might have in mind. That's one scenario. And when this aerial ceasefire is announced, Trump can, of course, boldly take credit for it. I stopped, like a Marvel superhero, I stopped the shelling of Ukrainian cities. And basically that's fine. Second option, Russia refuses any kind of aerial ceasefire. In that case, Trump will most likely impose sanctions on the 8th. And the main question is whether they will comply, or Putin might slightly modify this scenario. He could say, all right, we agree to an aerial ceasefire, but withdraw your troops from all 4 regions. That's what they said back then in response to the ultimatum for an unconditional ceasefire. Withdraw or officially recognize somewhere that all these territories are ours, and then we can talk. So this is also a very likely scenario. Yes, we're all for an aerial ceasefire. Of course, of course. But the 4 regions and Crimea. By the way, this would be equivalent to them just bluntly refusing. Everyone understands this perfectly well. And there's yet another possible scenario. Russia doesn't agree to any kind of aerial ceasefire, and Trump doesn't impose sanctions. Is that possible? Of course it's possible. Not so long ago, we heard that Trump is ready to just get up and walk away from the table altogether. Both Marco Rubio and Vice President Vance have repeated that Trump could get fed up with all this. He could just get up and walk away from the table and so on. But now we can see, including from the new contracts, that some people have found it profitable to supply weapons. And there's a new scheme now supplying NATO countries. And the NATO countries, we'll talk about that a bit later, but the first signs of it are already coming our way. So that's how it is. In other words, Trump's rhetoric has changed significantly, and his actions have also become different. That's true. That is, without his approval, there wouldn't have been any new contracts with the Pentagon, nor any scheme to send weapons to Ukraine through NATO. Tonight, around midnight Kyiv time, at about 11:30, I think, Trump will make a statement. Apparently, he is already expecting to get a response from the Russians through Witkoff. I fully understand that, like me, you're probably really sick and tired of these seemingly endless sanctions back and forth. But to be completely fair, things have truly sped up quite significantly, and I'm no longer being sarcastic at all when I genuinely say that Donald Trump really might impose these very serious sanctions. I think that if Trump gets the answer he needs, well, at least an acceptable one, even if it's just about an air ceasefire, then Kellogg will immediately fly here to Kyiv. Although I think he's probably already on his way, maybe sitting somewhere at the border. What does Putin lose if there's a real full-fledged air ceasefire? He loses a lot. That's why he's digging in with all his little claws, as thin as a moth's with his little heeled shoes. He's resisting. He doesn't want it. First of all, any drastic change in the situation right now will be seen as Putin got scared of sanctions or Trump. That's how it is. But how could that be? Well, the deep country gold-toothed folks, yeah, what gold-tooth? Toothless. What will they say? We've got the Hazel, we've got the dumpling maker, we've got Satan, we've got Poseidon, Bulava, and all sorts of other words the deep country folks don't understand. Why are we making some kind of move? Why is that? We'll even have to lock Medvedev in the booth so he doesn't accidentally spill the bag again and call in the American nuclear submarines. So we need to somehow explain why we stopped punishing all these Satanists. And that's a problem. I read today that maybe Putin would like to get out of this war, but the army and the people wouldn't understand him. Actually, he hasn't cared about the opinion of the people for a long time. I don't even think he really understands that these people exist for him in any way. But with the army is a bit different. That's why it seems his generals are convincing him that in another month or two the front will collapse, will start advancing, and will be in Kyiv. Well, in general, he's been fed these promises for years now. And then there are these leaks coming out of the Kremlin. Reuters writes, "The threat of sanctions is painful, unpleasant, but not catastrophic." A source familiar with the discussions in the Kremlin told Reuters. The Kremlin believes that it is still unclear whether Trump will actually carry out his ultimatum. Well, Trump has made threats before, but then didn't take any action. Well, we've heard that from Lavrov too, so that's how it is. Friends, let me remind you, in any case, Putin is not going to stop the war. We have an important fundraiser for our soldiers, and I always thank you for your help with it. This is a fundraiser for FPV drones on fiber optics for the 101st Brigade. Right now, among other things, they are holding the line in Chasiv Yar. All these Russian fairy tales about taking Chasiv Yar are complete nonsense. The soldiers, the warriors, respond and write that they're holding the position and have no intention of leaving. Yes, the Russians are infiltrating, yes, they've occupied part of Chasiv Yar, but our guys are holding on and have no plans to leave. The 101st Brigade, so they need a lot of FPV drones on fiber optics to get into all those cracks where this filth has crept in and wipe out this scum. I really ask you to support them. The link to donate is in the description of this video, and the link is also in the comments. There's a link to the Monobank, there's a private number, and there's PayPal for those who want to help from abroad. Personally, I am always deeply grateful, and if you happen to be watching not on my channel, here's a QR code. It leads directly to the bank. Let's help our warriors. Right now and always, they are true heroes. By the way, for a week now, there's been joyful howling from the swamps that Russian special forces have captured some British soldiers on Ukrainian territory in Ochakiv. They landed there in boats, I don't know, maybe on some kind of combat crocodiles. Grabbed them, and not just any soldiers, but MI6 intelligence officers. Captured them and, well, took them prisoner. I'm sure you've seen this information 100% because the bots are spreading it so much that even my ears are ringing. People keep coming to me. So what's up with the British soldiers? Well, now we're going to find out what's up with the British soldiers. Let's start by reading the news itself. Russian Federation Special Forces have captured several NATO officers in Ukraine. Ignorant people say on Ukraine. It's in Ukraine. Remember this once and for all. This is the first concrete proof that NATO officers are actively participating in the conflict with Russia. We're talking about Lieutenant Colonel Richard Carroll and Colonel, Edward Blake. Edward Blake, Richard Carroll, names like that, they sound almost Hollywood, right? Like straight out of a movie. Well, okay, let's not nitpick here. And also about an unidentified MI6 agent. Did you get that? How serious is that? They were taken prisoner during a daring raid carried out by Russian special forces in the city of Ochakiv. And now pay attention. The detainees were found to have maps indicating strategic sites on Russian territory, air defense plans, secret instructions for cooperating with Ukrainian drone operators, discs containing surveillance camera footage, and recordings of conversations with the British General Staff, which unequivocally refutes the British Foreign Office's claim that these were just ordinary tourists. I haven't even seen the British Foreign Office's version, but my God, do you really need to check sources over there? Why? Naturally, there are no photos or videos, although I'm sure that if they had really captured military personnel of that level, they'd be showing them non-stop on all Russian channels. Discs with surveillance camera footage and recordings of conversations with the British General Staff. Now that's some next-level espionage, huh? They even keep recordings of conversations with the General Staff. Just in case, you know? Might have to listen through them. The only thing I'm not sure about is whether there are some floppy disks or maybe videotapes too. Maybe they just didn't mention it. Honestly, it feels like Putin himself wrote this news. This is just so Putin, the one who still lives in the era of luxury and Mercedes 600s. I mean that replicant version of him. He was talking about this not so long ago, after all. This news is straight out of that time period. So they've busted the spies with floppy disks, huh? By the way, isn't it odd that MI6 operates on British territory, not in Ukraine? But whatever. Yeah, it's strange they didn't also find, I don't know, some of those little vials for mosquitoes, you know, to turn regular ones into those special mosquitoes. By the way, friends, there are also the Zapad 2025 exercises, which are supposed to take place in about a month, including on the territory of Belarus. And the dreary mumbling of the old men on Valam about the hazel tree didn't impress anyone in mass production at all. But real exercises, real drills on NATO's borders, that's something else. The first echelon of Russians with military equipment for the Zapad 2025 exercises has arrived in Belarus, so now they'll start arriving with equipment, transferring personnel there. Germany, in fact, has therefore deployed fighter jets to Poland. Well, everyone is getting ready, getting prepared. And for some reason, I feel that yes, provocations are certainly possible. By the way, Lukashenko deliberately moved the exercises away from the borders so that he wouldn't get hit out of nowhere. So that's how it is. But there will be provocations. Now they're going to create a picture-perfect scene, a classic of the genre. These Russian soldiers arrived, so they're greeted with real bread and salt. Some girls came out to meet them. Honestly, I don't even know. Peace, friendship, chewing gum. Lukashenko will answer for all this too, believe me. And not just answer, he'll go to jail if he lives that long. He will definitely go to jail. I don't know if Putin will go to jail or if he'll live to see it. But with Lukashenko, I think that's a fact. And by the way, maybe he'll find peace somewhere near Yanukovych in the Moscow suburbs. And now our segment, Import Substitution Victories. When I saw this news, I realized that basically that's it. We've arrived. And this news is the embodiment of all that mumbling and grumbling. When someone comes to Putin, like today, just a whole crowd showed up. Kemezov was there and some others too, all telling him, now we're going to launch our serial production airplane. And now we're going to make our own smartphone, an intergalactic spaceship. Now we're going to do everything. We just need, please give us $1 billion, and by 2039 we'll definitely get it all done. And here's the news for you. Russia has asked Ethiopia to lease them a passenger airplane. This is called wet leasing in professional jargon, when not just the plane is leased, but the plane with the crew, with maintenance and everything included, but it's used by the Russian Federation. So it's as if it's Ethiopian Airlines flying, but in reality it's being used by Russians. But as soon as this became known, the European Union said, but they're under sanctions. So Ethiopia, you have 11 airliners scheduled to arrive to you under contract. They won't be coming. And Ethiopia said, what are you talking about? That never happened. We didn't even have any discussions. And then, officially, at the official level, they said, never will we give any planes to the Russians, and so on. By the way, the start of large-scale serial production of Russia's own aircraft has been postponed to 2028. Let me remind you, this deadline has been pushed back for the last 10 years. Every year they move it and move it again. 2028 will become 2038, and so on and so forth. Putin, with a straight face, was saying that, well, given the current situation, we need to assemble our serial Russian aircraft entirely from our own components. What components of yours are you talking about? What exactly are you making from these components? By the way, friends, don't forget to subscribe to this channel. It might not lift your spirits, but it's good for falling asleep. Or maybe it does lift your spirits, actually, I don't know. Just yesterday I was telling you about how that Russian puppet, the head of Gagazia, Gutsul, got 7 years, and Simonian has been crying about it since morning, posting one thing after another. Everyone will end up in jail. Those who are putting their agents behind bars, into Moldovan dungeons. Basically, everyone will be imprisoned. Mothers of children and so on and so forth. In other words, if she had done what all those Gherkin types and other ghouls did in Donbass, it would have resulted in there would have been a colossal number of victims. And she was involved in this. One of them. That's why she's getting 7 years. Well, maybe she'll get out earlier, I don't know. And as for Simonian, she'd be better off going to find out whether they've already accepted Kyosein into hell or not. He's honestly just gotten on everyone's nerves. So, come on, either go there, or well, where else? There then. They just don't want to accept him in hell. Anyway, Simonian is really troubled that they've decided to imprison this Gutsul. And let me remind you, if you end up in jail, Simonian will most likely definitely end up there too. After the war, they'll be handing them over in batches. And today, the entire Russian Ministry of Foreign Affairs, represented by Zakharova, made the following statement. Just take a moment to appreciate the level of cynicism here. The Foreign Ministry, Zakharova, in connection with the verdict against the head of Gagazia, Gutsul, violation of human rights, disregard for the rule of law, and rejection of political pluralism are the main features of the police state that Moldova has become. Well, that's what they wrote. That's what they call it. Violation of human rights? Unbelievable. Another blow. Just yesterday I was talking about Gutsul, and today yet another powerful and unpleasant blow for the Russian Federation. The annulment of Milorad Dodik's mandate by the Central Election Commission of Bosnia and Herzegovina. This is a major blow to Russian influence in the Balkans. That really is the case. Milorad Dodik, let me remind you, is an openly pro-Russian Putin supporter, the leader of the Bosnian Serbs. He often travels to Moscow, frequently meets with Putin, has publicly spoken out against sanctions on Russia, and has supported Kremlin policies. In general, he has supported separatist ideas. They're hitting hard, rooting out Russian agents. Very early elections have been scheduled, but there's still the question of who will win there. I don't know who really understands the situation. Please write to me in the comments about who has what chances in these early EE elections. But it's unpleasant. It's very unpleasant. If Russia tries to stir things up there now, Well, they just don't have time for that right now. It's not their priority. In peacetime, they would be fueling protests and so on and so on. You see how step by step Russian agents are being rooted out while Putin is at war. That is, Ukraine is keeping him tied up here. Practically the entire budget is directed toward the war, so these hotspots of potential separatism need to be suppressed while Putin is fighting. Maybe it sounds cynical. Maybe it is cynical to say that Ukraine is covering for others, but that's how it is. Ukraine has shielded others and is now giving the opportunity to resolve those issues that no one wanted to deal with in peacetime. Later, when Putin, embittered, pulls back from here, believe me, he will throw all his efforts into destabilization, and by leaving these hotspots of possible separatism, you are actually putting your own country at risk. And Orban has quieted down a bit. He might now try to stand up for Dodik, at least rhetorically, but lately he has been keeping a low profile. He's like the pterodactyl of the world. He sits and waits because he could also end up in Trump's crosshairs if he pushes too hard against aid to Ukraine. Before their directions aligned. But what about now? Trump even seems ready to impose sanctions against Russia, but Orban is against sanctions. So what now? Putin is doing the splits, but this guy has stretched himself so far that his pants have already ripped 3 times. That's what happens when you try to serve 2 masters. That's how it is. The Scandinavian countries, Sweden, Denmark, and Norway, are allocating $500 million to Ukraine as part of this program through NATO. Well, that's good, in my opinion. And I think we'll be seeing more news like this in the near future. But we're waiting for the main news. So, what's up with that Molly-like trash? How is she going to try to fool everyone again? And how will Donald Trump react to this? Friends, let's believe in the armed forces of Ukraine. Let's believe in Ukraine. Take care of yourselves and your loved ones. Subscribe to the channel. If possible, please support the fundraiser for our soldiers who are right now in one of the hottest spots. Thank you so much for that. Wishing us all a peaceful day and glory to Ukraine.